You can assess for hours and still not understand all the reasons for why something is happening. So my thing is now I do about a 10, 15-minute assessment, real quick and dirty, just to see some of the basics of what's going on, their default strategies of movement, why they're maybe compensating a certain way that they do, just looking at maybe their posture, their walking mechanics, their plank, their squat, their chest press, their row, their lunge, maybe a single leg balance, take a few notes, done. I can see 90% of what I need to see in a 10-minute assessment like that, compared to if you have me do a 5-hour assessment going through so many details. And the other thing is too, I should be assessing them every single rep of every single session. If I'm not, then I'm not doing my job. Okay, I don't have to necessarily give them external feedback every rep, but in my mind, I should be, let's see, something doesn't look right there. Let's see if they correct it.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the Invictus Mindset Podcast. Today's guest is a fitness professional and the founder of Advanced Human Performance, where they help clients break through genetic barriers as well as overcome training, fitness, health, and nutritional obstacles. Making his second appearance on the show, Dr. Joel Seedman. What's up, man?
What's up? How's it going? Thanks for having me on again.
I'm really excited to pick your brain. You're doing some really cool things within the strength and conditioning field, within fitness, mindset, training methodology, programming. And, something that I think about a lot is redefining fitness. And that's definitely something that you're doing over there.
Nice. Yeah. Try to. Yeah. Just, I think over here, we're very focused on doing what's optimal and what's right, not just on what everybody else is doing. And regardless of whether or not people say it's good or not good, we don't really care. It's kind of like, hey, here's what the science shows. Here's what we know is working. And whether everyone buys in, only a small percentage of the people buy in, it's doesn't really matter to us. We do what we feel works.
I really appreciate that because it's so easy to get stuck in the media world of, these are all the things that are hot topics or Twitter trends or, all these things, but you're really tinkering in the lab. You're looking at the research. You have the theoretical plus the practical approach. And then you're also taking it a step further with the experimentation. Let's try this on various demographics and let's see how it works. And let's get feedback from people along the way. And so I really appreciate your broad and inclusive approach, man.
I appreciate that. Yeah, my pleasure, man. It's I always enjoy your questions. They're very genuine, but you also think, outside the box. It's a good match here. It's good.
Yeah, it'll be fun, man. Well, we're kind of at the tail end of summer-ish. And, typically in the summer, you're going to get, some of your pro athletes in the gym, pro football guys, maybe some of the baseball guys during the All-Star break, as you briefly mentioned. What's it been like having so many high caliber athletes coming in and out of your facility?
Yeah, it's been good. With COVID the last few years, it was a very unique state especially in the football kind of NFL realm. And there were a lot of injuries last year and the year before, but especially last year in the NFL. And fortunately, most of my guys, they were healthy. So I had a lot of new guys this year. We had a lot of injuries and kind of therapeutic things that we had to deal with. And that was a challenge, but it's also fun. I honestly prefer having athletes come in who maybe have some type of injury they're trying to overcome or some type of injurious background, because the buy-in from them is a little bit quicker because they can feel right away where it's like, I still have a lot of shoulder pain or knee pain. And then we have them do an exercise correctly. We enhance their biomechanics, even that same session, the very first one. And immediately they can feel like, wow, that doesn't feel painful. All of a sudden, like, even though my knee previously bothered me on squats, when I did it like this same day, it's like no pain. And immediately we start getting buy-in from them, and then they really get excited. They get pumped. They get committed to the process. And then it's just a very, smooth and kind of seamless process that we have. And it's accelerated because they understand what they're doing. Their mindset is right. And I don't want to just have them do things for the sake of doing it. I want them to understand why they're doing it, because if they can understand it, they're going to believe in it a lot more, and their passion and their mentality and focus is going to be much higher.
Yeah, for sure. It's so interesting because, within the football landscape, especially professional football, I think the average career is 3 years or less. And there's so many prevalent injuries. We're starting to hear a lot more about, the concussion challenges and the headspace issues that come post-football. And, you and I both know in strength and conditioning, the process or the policy is always the best ability is availability. And so some of these guys could be the most talented people in the world, but if they can't make it onto the field, they're not an asset to their team, to their organization. And, they're just on to the next guy, which, sucks. But at the end of the day, it is a business. And so when these guys are coming in to see you, they want to be better yesterday. And there's always this microwave effect on make me better. I want to be able to do what I know I'm capable of doing. How does that work for you guys being more of a strength and conditioning facility? Do you have synergy with athletic training? Are there body workers that you guys work with? Is there active release therapy or some sort of therapeutic protocol? Are you able to help heal these athletes through optimal movement, biomechanics, and true education?
Yeah, we used to have at this facility, a lot more body work people, people that did like art and did some different types of like shock wave treatments. We do have a masseuse who's really good, Shane. A lot of the athletes, even if they're not injured, they just love getting massages. Just, they think it feels good, and I'm totally fine with that. But for the most part, we've kind of eliminated a lot of those body work modalities, and pretty much the whether it's the therapeutic treatment they need or the strength treatment they need, it's kind of all one and the same now. It's basically on the same spectrum and same continuum. It's just, hey, if they need more of a therapeutic modality, we'll still have them do the whole 90-degree eccentric isometric approach. It's just going to be with lighter weights, longer holds, and really focusing 100% on form and technique. Whereas, hey, they need to gain more strength, they need to gain more muscle mass, we'll have them use the 90-degree eccentric isometric protocol, and a lot of the techniques that I use will just amp up the loading and the intensity as needed and as they're capable, obviously within a safe parameter and protocol. So it's crazy. I mean, the amount of extra body work and treatments that my athletes need, it becomes less and less the more efficient they become biomechanically. And the athletes who have been with me for the longest and have really mastered their biomechanics, their need to do all those other treatments, it's markedly reduced to the point where some of them just don't even need it.
Yeah, it's really cool that you touched on that, because sometimes I feel like within the world of health and fitness, people get so married to the process of, I have to foam roll, I have to do this specific activation, this really, extensive warm up that bleeds into the time domain of the meat and potatoes of the workout. And, I'm not an all or nothing style thinker, so I don't think you should always warm up or always not warm up. It's probably case dependent on lifestyle in that particular moment, inflammatory markers, the intensity of where they're at in their season or chapter in life. But I do think it's important that, your recovery should kind of mesh well with your training. And if you're training so hard that you can't recover, that you need a 45-minute warm up, or you're training so intense that your mechanics are probably flawed a little bit, maybe it's time to hire a professional or get into an in-depth conversation to reassess the process and procedures so that you're not feeling that way. Because if you can't recover from it, you can't perform. And in theory, you're just beating yourself into the ground with junk miles.
Oh, exactly. I mean, I always tell my athletes that, they may get a little bit sore, but I want them to feel like the next day and the day after that they actually feel better. They actually feel more functional. They actually feel like if they had to go onto the field and compete, that they could actually compete at just as high of a level, if not higher. I don't want them to feel like, man, my body is so torn up, so shot. Now there's the time and a place for, maybe having like kind of a shock workout, especially it's an off season where, they're going to have several days of rest and recovery, maybe on a Friday where they're going to have the whole weekend off. But generally speaking, we want to maximize the quality while still creating very high intensity. And we don't want to use high quantity to create intensity. We want to rely on quality to create intensity. And I think that's kind of the difference. And even back to something you mentioned earlier, I think before we even started recording, talking about kind of the RPE scale. And that's always an interesting one. And I have athletes even asking me like, hey, like how intense should this be? And I always tell them, regardless of the weight, whether it's 10 pounds or 100 pounds, the RPE should almost be max every time.
Let me bookmark you there just for a quick moment, just to define that term for our listeners. So RPE is rate of perceived exertion. And I think sometimes the metrics, at least in the CrossFit space, are, how fast or how heavy. And I think you can take it a step further around, how does it feel? What is the muscle contraction? And, will you elaborate on that a little bit on how you kind of define RPE and how you help athletes understand what that's supposed to feel like?
Yes, it's the RPE thing. It's been always a unique discussion, and I over time noticed that for everything that I do, for everything that I have my athletes do, that RPE scale really doesn't change, as I was just kind of referring to. I want it to stay at 8, 9, or 10 every single rep of every single set, whether it's body weight, warm up weight, empty dowel, whatever it may be. I want them to create their own tension. I don't want them to rely on the weight to create the tension, because if they do that, by the time they actually get to the heavy weight, their nervous system has not ingrained proper firing patterns and optimal neuromuscular efficiency. And so their technique's going to break down. So if they create very high intensity with 20% of their weight, 30%, 40, 50, 60, by the time they actually go to 80, 90% of their weight, the movement doesn't feel that much different. That's what a lot of my athletes tell me. They're like, man, we just went twice the weight we did when it was hard at the beginning, and it actually feels the same now. It doesn't feel any heavier. I'm like, yeah, it's because your nervous system is firing efficiently, and every rep we're grooving those proper motor programs.
This episode is brought to you by Mush. My friends over at Mush created an incredibly cool product of ready-to-eat overnight oats. And for those of you that listen to the podcast often, you know simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And Mush has done just that, as their products have no more than 7 clean ingredients that are dairy-free, gluten-free, with no added sugar. Mush started right here at Invictus, as they had a vision to create convenient, healthy, and clean nutrition. And this landed them on Shark Tank, where the famous Mark Cuban invested in them. Now they're found in retailers all over the country, including Costco, Sprouts, Target, and Whole Foods. Check out my friends over at www.eatmush.com. Trident Coffee is sponsoring this episode of the Invictus Mindset Podcast. My guys over at Trident taught me something really important this last year, that we are all a bundle of stories, both good and bad, and everything in between. At Trident, they're storytellers. All of their cold brews remind their customers that they are part of something bigger than themselves. They help create connections through symbology and storytelling that engage their customers on an emotional level, and this distinguishes them from other coffee brands. You can find Trident in Imperial Beach and in Coronado. They offer over 14 plus nitro cold brews along with dairy-free options. You can find the perfect brew and pair it with one of their treats from their keto bakery. All these options will allow you to support your health and fitness journey with Trident Coffee. They're more than just a coffee company. You can check them out over at tridentcoffee.com and use code Invictus20 for 20% off online and in tap rooms. Once again, that's tridentcoffee.com. Use code Invictus20 for 20% off online and in tap rooms. Take your coffee experience to the next level. 2 important factors for us over at Invictus Mindset are true care and attention to detail. My friends over at RX Smart Gear have been bringing innovative fitness tools to the market since 2009. From their award-winning Evo speed ropes, to their amazing gymnastics grips, to their line of inflatable fitness equipment, they're constantly looking to problem solve within the fitness industry. They're always allowing us to have our gear work for us rather than against us. Hop on over to RX Smart Gear and use discount code Invictus Mindset to shop their latest cutting edge gear. Have your gear work with you and not against you. It's so interesting because The Body Really Does Keep the Score, which is a great book for people to reference if they haven't read that before. But it's interesting because like our mind knows what's on the bar. And so sometimes we don't respect it. And it's like, oh, we'll just do this as a warm-up set. Like these sets don't actually count. But if you actually manipulate your headspace a little bit in the beginning to really generate optimal tension as if it was your 90% or above, well, now you can truly wake up the nervous system, have optimal firing patterns, and every single rep is now practice to improve the movement pattern versus, oh yeah, I'm just kind of doing this to up my core body temperature. Will you touch on that a little bit and how you kind of help educate people around percentage-based loading has its place, right? We saw it a lot with Westside Barbell, but it also leads to number chasing. And sometimes that is really, really counterproductive for the headspace of, especially longtime lifters that, maybe experienced a tweak or lifestyle changed a little bit, that they can't necessarily hit the same numbers. And now they're in this psychological dichotomy versus just you versus the weights.
Yeah, the number chasing thing, I think that's been the downfall and detriment of so many lifters over the years and so many athletes. I mean, as soon as you get into that mindset where you feel compelled that you have to reach certain numbers, no matter what, it's like, okay, everything goes out the window. My form goes out the window. I'll use momentum, I'll cheat, I'll shift, I'll compensate, whatever it takes, because I have in my head, I got to reach this number. Or, a few weeks ago, I hit this number. If I don't beat it this time, I'm getting weaker. God forbid that should happen. I got to beat it at all costs. And that really leads to biomechanical breakdowns and really poor firing patterns, because the athlete doesn't think about, hey, how effective can I make each rep? They think about, hey, how many reps can I get with the heaviest weight possible? Good example of this, just 2 hours ago, I just had Chris Carson. He's a former running back. He had a neck injury last year, so he's kind of forced into retirement. But we did a weight on rows, seated rows. He can easily row 250 pounds in the seated row. We did 125 pounds, about 50% of us 1 rep max. And I said, hey, we're going to do sets of 4 or 5 reps each set. And I want you to make those the most intense 4 or 5 reps that you can do. Squeeze the daylights out of your muscles. You're going to go eyes closed. You're going to take all the momentum out. You're going to go smooth and controlled. I want you to focus on your technique and biomechanics, taking all the tension out of the neck and traps. And he finished each set, which took about 30 seconds because the reps are so slow and controlled and deliberate. And he finished each set, and he's like, my gosh, I felt my back so much on that. My lats are lit up. He's out of breath. He's even one said he felt like he was seeing birdies because he was creating the intensity. He wasn't relying on the weight. And the good thing is, if we actually decide to go heavy in the future, it's not going to feel much different.
That's super cool. I think it's a great way to preserve the integrity of the body and the athlete, because it's not being controlled by external factors or metrics. It's you creating the tension, which is so cool because your mind knows what's on the bar or what the weight of the dumbbells are, but your muscles don't really know. They know maximal tension.
Exactly.
And so it's just interesting creating this separation a little bit. How do you help educate people around this? Obviously you're trying to get them to feel it, but as far as some of your books or how you coach people remotely or how you talk about it with your social media, how are some of the ways that you create buy-in when people are like, you see it in like every high school gym, like, oh, you got, 12 dips, I'm going to do 13.
Right.
And there's this like comparison that we see that's, inevitable in a social media culture.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. You have some people who are just so hard set that this is lousy. This is not an effective training method. They've never tried it, which is quite often is people comment on some of my social media posts. The people that hate on my post the most are almost always the ones that have never tried it. And I just say, hey, try it a handful of times. Just try it even one time, and really focus, really try and do the method the way I've advocated and see what happens. If you don't like it, great. You don't like it, you're right and I'm wrong in this scenario. We'll go our separate ways, but at least give it a try. So I always encourage people to at least try it and see how they feel, because once you try it, once you really create that maximal intramuscular tension, as you mentioned, once you have proper alignment, posture, your feet are locked in, which that's a whole nother topic in and of itself, and you go to those 90-degree joint angles, the amount of tension you create, it's like, wow, you can feel things firing that you've never felt firing, and you can feel tension off of your joints like you've never had, and tension on the muscles to another level that you've never experienced. And you can also feel things coming into alignment. Like, sometimes folks will say, whenever I squat, I feel like I'm shifting to one side, or I'm kind of laterally leaning to one side. We find that a lot of those compensation patterns take care of themselves when we just focus on foundational principles of optimal movement. Because when you go too extreme outside those boundaries and use, like, for example, excessive range of motion was one that I would say, you do have a lot of compensation patterns. So I think when people start feeling it, it's the feel. I can't get over that enough, and I can't emphasize that enough. When people feel it, they start buying in. So I think that's the big thing. They have to feel it. But educating them in the process and getting them to try it at least one time can sometimes be easier said than done.
It's so interesting too, because People will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget the way you made them feel. And if people are open to the concept of the eccentric isometrics, which is slow on the way down or slow lengthening of the muscle fiber, an isometric hold traditionally at a 90-degree joint angle, and then with a little bit more of an explosive movement pattern on the concentric. And that's like a traditional kind of general description. Is that correct for our listeners?
Exactly.
And what's cool is if they do that, they're going to feel certain things. You're going to feel the muscle fibers truly firing. You're not just relying on tendons and ligaments for that bottom position. You're relying on psychological focus, midline stability, and not just in the front of the abs and the rectus abdominis, but also 360 degrees around through the obliques, through the erectors. You're striving to find thoracic extension or optimal posture, a neutral head location, so you're not that forward head tilt that most of us have that talk on a microphone or computer all day. And just, really paying attention. And I think if you do that, it creates this almost meditative awareness around, oh, I'm in pain because let me correct some of these habits. Let me slow down and integrate optimal habits and movement pattern within my training. And then as a byproduct of being a slave to good habits, you experience less pain, enhanced performance, and then you view and interact with the world in a more seamless, peaceful manner.
It's true. When you have pain and you have inflammation and your body feels tight and spastic from improper movement, it's like you almost get into a neuromuscularly lazy mentality because your body doesn't want to move. It's painful. It almost it's not just psychological. It's actually physiological because your body starts to create inhibitory signals to shut down movements that could potentially cause injuries. So it's not just in the mind. It's your mind is kind of understanding and sensing what your body is experiencing, and it reacts accordingly. So when we can minimize that level of pain and we can start getting them to do reps where it's like, ooh, no pain. Okay, we can kind of start rewiring their nervous system to understand, hey, they can actually squat with no pain. They just have to do it the right way. They can actually do a chest press without shoulder pain. They just have to do it the right way. They start building up confidence, but it starts physiologically, in my opinion. But you also have to have the right mindset before you go in. So the physical, the physiological, the psychological, and mental, it's really tough to differentiate it and try to separate them. They work in tandem. And I think that's a big thing that people kind of forget about. They try and isolate them individually.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great point. I want to touch on this topic of pain. I was very fortunate about a month ago or so. I was able to connect with big wave surfer Laird Hamilton. And he was experiencing limited knee flexion temporarily. And in his world, when he's maneuvering on a surfboard and riding some of these big waves, like, you can't have limitations in your joints, man. Then you're thinking about that as opposed to really trying to mesh with the wave and, optimize your balance in relation to the inevitably moving surface. And, what's so interesting is we had this great conversation around pain, and our society in general is like, oh, pain, you shouldn't be having that. Let's take this drug, or let's do this modality. And he made such a great point. He said, maybe the pain's supposed to be there. Maybe we're supposed to understand it, change what we're doing, right? Because if we always do what we've always done, we'll always be what we've always been. So something that we were doing led to this pain. And I don't know, we just had this really primal conversation around pain and nature and how, we try to mask pain in our world within this comfort crisis. But in reality, maybe that's a whisper that's trying to teach us something. How do you kind of psychologically think about pain and help educate people if they've got a tweak rather than not training at all? Do you train through it? Do you train around it? What does that concept look like to you?
Yeah, this is a very complex topic. First off, the whole pain science topic and field, it's very complex and complicated. And I think it's over the years, it's become emphasized that, a lot of this is in your mind and you got to tune it out. Or, like you said, try and get to the point where you just tune the pain out and kind of like, just disregard it. And I think, like you were saying, you actually want higher levels of pain sensitivity. You don't want to be desensitized to pain, because what ends up happening is those pain signals, as you alluded to, very important. I always say pain is probably the number one coaching mechanism in your body. It's better than any coach and better than any pair of eyes you can hire to look at your technique or form. It's giving you immediate feedback about how you're doing a movement. And so if an athlete tells me, hey, they have pain when they're doing this movement or that movement, even if they had some type of injury, I almost immediately, in my head, I'm not going to tell them this right away, but immediately I'm like, okay, there's something biomechanically and intramuscularly off there. I don't care if they've had to have ACL reconstruction. I don't care if they have, something going on with their spine. If their muscles are firing properly, it's going to absorb that load and that tension, and it's going to take it off the injured site. So if we can have increased pain sensitivity and use that as a very strong sensory feedback mechanism, where we go into our movements and say, hey, how can I do this movement without triggering that pain? And instead of shutting off the pain mechanism, say, hey, how do I not trigger pain in the first place by doing the exercise properly or moving properly?
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic. I'm curious, something that we see a lot within our space is this patellofemoral pain right above the kneecap, where the quad kind of inserts right around the VMO, the vastus medialis, kind of in between there and the lateralis. And what's so interesting is traditionally, it's if somebody's not super warm, the sliding surfaces and the muscle tissue is not optimally sliding. It could be a muscle contraction issue where the patella is not aligning appropriately. But more often than not, in a sitting culture, we see a lot of issues just with really tight quads and hip flexors. Let's say you're working with an athlete and there's not a ton of discomfort in the activation in the warm-up phase, but then you give them, some sort of squat or lunge patterning, which I know you like to do in the majority of your full body sessions. They start experiencing this pain. How do you triage that problem in the moment? Do you, minimize the load, enhance the time under tension with the tempo, and then in between maybe give them a corrective or some sort of myofascial release piece? What are your principles for kind of managing pain intra-session?
The number one thing I would say is increase intramuscular tension, increase stiffness / increase co-contraction. It's basically all the same thing. It's when you tell someone, hey, stay tight, tighten up every muscle in your body. That is the biggest kind of secret tool you can use, not just for enhancing biomechanics, but for alleviating pain. I don't care where it's at, because when you start creating that full body tension, not only does your biomechanics start to become more aligned, but you start firing the muscles throughout the body. You create something called concurrent activation potentiation, which is just a fancy way of saying you increase neural drive to the working extremities. So now those muscles of the extremities and around the bones and around the tissues, they're firing better. So now they're absorbing force. So there's a biomechanical side to this too, where we can say, hey, we need to adjust their biomechanics. But before I even do that, before I start adjusting their biomechanics, hey, your knee is shifted this way, your posture, we need to adjust this. First, stay tight. Get tight, create intramuscular tension throughout your whole body. Because once they do that, a lot of those biomechanical deviations start to basically improve and eliminate themselves. And then we'll start looking at more subtle things, the biomechanics and the posture, and say, hey, position your shoulders better here, or maybe don't let your knee shift out this way. Let's keep it more in line. But that's where the eccentric isometrics come in so handy, because they're going slow. And the whole point is to go slow so that you can use your body's own sensory feedback to tune into what's going on, both at the intramuscular level and at the biomechanical level. So if they say, hey, they're feeling pain, I may give them a few cues, but I may say, hey, I want you to feel that pain, tune into it, and make some adjustments so that you don't feel the pain. And immediately they start adjusting correctly, because we give them the chance to with the eccentric isometric protocol. And then they're like, oh man, that doesn't feel as bad. That's less pain. That feels better. And then over time, we just keep doing that, and it keeps becoming more and more efficient.
Totally. What if you were to give that cue, just to play devil's advocate over here, and, it's in a squat pattern, and, you say to them, hey, I want you to move with maximal tension in your eccentric isometric and try your best to minimize pain. And all of a sudden you see some weird biomechanical things. They start to shift. They start to lean a certain way. What's kind of your next protocol in that moment, to try to optimize biomechanics, but also minimize pain, especially in a person that has the psychology of, oh, I don't want to feel this. I want out. I want out.
It's two things. It's a constant interplay between that tension that we just talked about and also mentally wrapping your head around the proper biomechanics. You kind of have to go back and forth. So when I said like, hey, let's don't think about the biomechanics for a second. Think about that, creating that full body tension. Okay, they create the full body tension. Okay, now let's go back to the biomechanics for a second. Okay, let's fix this. Okay, now let's go right back to that intramuscular tension. It's constant interplay where we never kind of like go to one and completely exclude the other. We may go to one for a second because mentally and even from a motor learning standpoint, there's only so many cues you can attend to at any one time. You got about one or two things, attentionally speaking, for your attention capacity that you can really focus on. You start giving them too many things, they're going to basically be compromised. So you focus on one or two things. Okay, get those. Now let's go back to this. So that's a big thing. But, always coming back to the mindset and biomechanics of, hey, let's keep things aligned. And that's where the eyes closed comes into, because when you start doing eyes closed movements and you take out some of that visual feedback and some of that sensory feedback from your eyes, you start to feel like unstable and unbalanced, and like you're going to lose your base of support when you start to shift and you start to kind of go outside of those biomechanical patterns. So that's where we'll throw in some of the eyes closed patterns too, or eyes closed protocols.
I'd like to take a moment to thank our friends over at Vuori. They are bringing a new perspective on performance apparel. Their products are incredibly versatile and allow for freedom and flexibility in any arena. As humans, we are complex creatures, always on the move and always on the go. Allow Vuori to join you as you navigate the complexities of the human experience. Whether you are training, adventuring, lounging, traveling, or attending meetings, Vuori has options to suit your active lifestyle. My personal favorites are the men's core short and their line of Ponto performance products, which are so incredibly soft. Check these guys out over at vuori.com/Invictus Mindset for 20% off your very first purchase and free shipping. That's vuori.com/Invictus Mindset for 20% off your very first purchase and free shipping. Everything they have is designed to work out in, but doesn't look or feel like it. It's so freaking comfortable that you won't want to wear anything else. Breathing, movement, circulation, digestion. What do all these body functions have in common? Our muscles. There are over 600 muscles in the human body that are responsible for supporting our daily activities. That's why your muscle health is incredibly important. On this podcast, I always discuss seeking our peak expression and striving to maximize our human potential. And so I try to share with you the top products that I find on the market. My H&B is a clinically proven ingredient that has been shown to help build and maintain lean muscle mass, increase strength, improve recovery, and enhance body composition. Learn more about your muscle health at myhmb.com/Invictus. Once again, that's myhmb.com/Invictus. Enhance your muscle health and enhance your life. I can't help but smirk over here, Joel, because I feel like, I presented you with a little bit of a randomized case study there. And it was so cool to get a gentle glimpse within the mind of, such a professional like yourself, but also a critical thinker. And I think that's a huge issue within the strength and conditioning world. It's this obsession around reps and sets and program design. But in reality, it's problem solving. It's understanding how to open a browser and close a browser mentally, physically, and emotionally in that moment. Change your tone based on the individual. What are the right buttons to push with this individual? Understanding, how can we play with the different variables? Is it eyes closed? Is it, trying to create more tension? Is it changing of load? Do we ultimately have to come to a decision to pivot the exercise because it's just not working in that moment, or regress the exercise and then create buy-in really fast around why we did that, so it's not detrimental to the ego around this concept of scaling where someone feels lesser than? It's like, no, it's more customized than it is scaling. But it's just so fun for me to see how you truly think. And like that right there, ladies and gentlemen, is the art of coaching. And, my goal is to utilize the art of connection and podcasting to help tease that out of amazing professionals like yourself, because sometimes I think the consumer, the member, or the client doesn't totally understand the interworkings of true coaching and true trying to problem solve, with this pain concept, which is probably very, very common amongst, the majority of fitness professionals out there. And so, as we wrap things up, like what kind of comes to mind as I gently summarize this?
Yeah, I mean, I can't emphasize enough this whole concept of if you feel pain, don't stop the movement, troubleshoot the movement.
Yeah.
That's so big. That is so big. And you don't have to have a coach to do that. And in fact, having a coach sometimes and becoming overly dependent on the coach's cues can often distract you from your own inherent and internal feedback. So the better the client and athlete can get on, hey, let me use this feedback. Let me tune out all other distractions. Let me tune out what this coach has told me to do in the past, what this coach is telling me to do now. Let me just do what feels optimal and pain-free while still understanding some of those subtle biomechanical things that we talked about. You can't just totally exclude. There are certain principles you kind of have to still keep in mind. Can't just go totally free roaming, so to speak. And then, use that to your feedback or to your improvements. So again, that pain is your best coaching tool you have in the body. It really is. So that's one of the big things I would encourage. Don't stop the movement just because it hurts. Fix it.
Totally, man. I really like that coaching dependency can become a real problem for a lot of people. And I think one of the best things a coach can do is, create a generalized blueprint, but then, hold hands in the beginning and then gently start to scoot away so that they can develop the confidence, the wherewithal, and the education biomechanically and, consistently over time to kind of implement their training on their own, which is super cool.
Oh yeah. Now I used to actually, I'm still working on this, and as a coach, we're always trying to improve. I think I've become a lot better on this the last year or two, but I used to overcue. I used to overcoach. And, the client would end up paying more attention to me and my cues than their own sensory feedback. Yeah. And now I'm getting better at, hey, like guiding them to their own feedback and telling them, hey, use that. They're like, hey, how's that look? I mean, it looks good. How does it feel? And they're like, well, I feel like maybe I felt a little tension here. And like, great, fix it. Now I'll use my eyes to kind of give them some feedback. And if visually it looks right, and physically it feels great and it's pain-free and it kind of adheres to some of the foundational elements that we've discussed, awesome. That's kind of what we're looking for.
Totally. I feel like that's the journey of a coach, right? It's like in the beginning, you're spitballing everything because you're like, you want everybody to know how smart you are. And then you kind of go through a phase of like, trying to figure out the right dosage or ratio. And I think the overcuing thing is at the foundation and root, it's because you really care. And you're like, I want to help you so bad. So like, here's word vomit that can help everything that I'm seeing. And then like you start to filter that over time, right? The Buddhist mentality of less is more. What's the one thing I can say that may correct multiple things at once? We look at the attention span of the modern day human, maybe 15 seconds or less, maybe even less than that. And I think it's such a mature way of coaching, and it takes out the ego of the coach. We're like, hey, make this about me. And it's like, no, this is their journey. And we're going to help co-pilot that subtly from the background where they can be the hero in their own story. And hopefully we can give them the appropriate tools to go kick some ass.
I love that. Yeah. I had an athlete come in a few months ago. He was an ex-athlete, college ex-athlete. But anyways, he was very analytical. He was very like, hey, give me all the cues so I can do this right. And I kind of gave him a lot of cues, and looking back, I probably gave him too many cues. And so he went away and did his workouts on his own. He said the level of pain improved a lot, but then it kind of like he had still some lingering issues in his back, for example, when he was doing squats, and he was like, yeah, I'm doing this. I'm making sure I'm implementing this cue and that cue. And I'm like, okay, now hold on. I think you're overthinking it. Let's go back here to some basic things. Go slow, close your eyes, stay as tight as possible, find your natural stopping point. And then he did that. It's like all those cues that we just talked about, those 12, 15 cues, it's like on the list. Okay, they all came together, and it came together better than when he was actually thinking about the cues individually. and it felt more pain-free because all the muscles were firing better. So like you said, sometimes the most simple cues, and what cue can you use to make multiple things come together?
That's super cool. Let's touch on this topic of the eyes closed. I'm really fascinated by that. I haven't spent a lot of time exploring that, so that'll definitely be something that is a huge takeaway for me to kind of play with. How do you implement that process? Is it typically with a kettlebell or a dumbbell? Do you do it in various fashions with a barbell? Like, what is the kind of the original process? If you've had somebody like myself that's never really trained with eyes closed before, how do you guide them through that experience?
Well, first off, the eyes closed thing, it's ancient. I mean, it goes back to centuries, and especially in the martial arts uh, culture, and even some of the Asian cultures of training. So sometimes people say like eyes closed, it's so stupid. Like, don't try and come up with something new. I'm like, dude, this has been around way before I was born. I'm just happened to be implementing it into strength training. So I will actually almost always start somebody off the first session, just giving them maybe one exercise, eyes closed, so they can feel it. Oftentimes, maybe an exercise that's like maybe a seated row or a chest press, something that doesn't involve quite as much balance. Because if you throw them in eyes closed too soon, when there's too much balance and stabilization involved, it becomes a distraction in and of itself, because they're now having to worry about the form and they're having to worry too much about balancing. It becomes a sensory overload. So I'll usually have them try it on one exercise, and I'll tell them, hey, now that your eyes are closed, use this as a chance to tune into your body's own feedback more. Try and have a better sense of feel and correct your form to another level. And immediately after about 3-4 reps, like, oh yeah, wow, I feel that so much more. And I kind of always tell them, okay, now I want you to keep this in mind, because over the course of our training of, however many sessions you decide to do, we're going to continue to use this eyes closed protocol, and we're going to continue to progress it more and more advanced, and use it sometimes on single leg variations and unstable variations. And so one of the other things with the eyes closed, when you actually do implement it on advanced movements, like say a hanging band lunge, okay, you throw a hanging band lunge into an eyes closed scenario, incredibly challenging. I don't care who the athlete is, how advanced they are, how great their biomechanics are. If you don't do it perfectly, you're not going to be able to do it. So that's why I like to use the eyes closed sometimes, because it really helps kind of give greater affirmation to why I have athletes do the techniques and the 90 degrees and the proper posture. Because when they don't do it like that on some of these eyes closed variations, they'll lose their balance over and over and over again until they actually implement the cues that we had been discussing. Like, you try and do a lunge, an eyes closed lunge, like we just talked about, and you don't have your core activated, you don't have your hips behind you, you have faulty posture, your ankles and feet aren't firing, you'll lose it every single time. So this is where they start to see, okay, this is why you had me do this exercise. This is why you kept telling me, hey, make sure my hips are aligned. This is why you kept telling me keep my core activated, my shoulders down and back. Because if you don't, when you start getting into more challenging scenarios, it becomes impossible.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see how things start to align and build off of each other, which is really, really rad. I want to take a step backwards a little bit and create a little bit of a step-by-step process for people. I'm Joe Schmo. I, was a high-level college athlete, and, I've been a working professional for 5 years, and I come into your facility at Advanced Human Performance. Where do we start? What does that original consult look like? What is your educational process in kind of giving quick deliverables around, hey, this is what we do, here's how I can help? And then what does that original consult kind of look like?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I was actually even thinking about this the other day. Sometimes just the ability to listen and not talk is like that immediately kind of builds confidence in the athlete. Like, hey, this guy is really interested in what I have to say. He's listening to me. And it just, for some reason, people would be surprised, rather than, you have someone come in and trying to sell them on the process. Just you listening to what they're having to say and them kind of pouring their guts out to you, especially if it's an injury. It's surprising what that does for the client trainer relationship and for their confidence in you. It really does. So I would encourage any trainer or coach or therapist, when they have a new person come in who really needs to get a lot off their chest and who's telling them, just listen. You don't need to talk too much. And then once they're kind of done telling you, I'll give them a kind of a brief synopsis of what I do and why I think, hey, this could be very beneficial for them. And then we'll start assessing them. Now, I used to be like an assessment fanatic. I would take an hour or two to assess people and still, hey, we can even go a little longer and let's see what muscle's not firing here. And let's go deeper into the imbalances on this side and try and figure out why this pain in this shoulder is maybe related to this hip. And it's so complex. You can assess for hours and still not understand all the reasons for why something is happening. So my thing is now I do about a 10, 15-minute assessment, real quick and dirty, just to see some of the basics of what's going on, their default strategies of movement, why they're maybe compensating a certain way that they do, just looking at maybe their posture, their walking mechanics, their plank, their squat, their chest press, their row, their lunge, maybe a single leg balance, take a few notes, done. I can see 90% of what I need to see in a 10-minute assessment like that, compared to if you have me do a 5-hour assessment going through so many details. And the other thing is too, I should be assessing them every single rep of every single session. If I'm not, then I'm not doing my job. Okay, I don't have to necessarily give them external feedback every rep, but in my mind, I should be, let's see, something doesn't look right there. Let's see if they correct it. So, and then usually with about 15 minutes left in the first session, I explain to them, hey, here's what's going on. Let's try to make a few corrections and let's see if you can notice how it feels after we do those corrections. And right there is that's the confidence builder, because when we start showing them the movements, showing them the corrections and how to do things properly, not only does it feel better and more locked in, but the clients who previously had pain in those movement patterns now either experience no pain or significantly reduced pain. And they're like, hey, when can we do our next session? I don't even have to say, hey, you want to come back for? I never say that. I hate that. I'm like, hey, contact me if you want to come back. They're like, oh, no, I want to come back. Like, let's sign it up in the books. I'm like, okay, great. Like, I don't have to be a salesman. And I think that's big when you can kind of master your craft. And I'm not saying I've mastered it, but you become more competent at it. The business side starts to come together. I know I kind of answered a lot of questions there.
No, I think you described it really well. Just to kind of unpack that a little bit, when you give a generalized synopsis around, what you guys do there, what does that sound like? What are some of the things that you say to create buy-in? And, from the outside looking in, a little bit of a untraditional fitness, protocol. It's different than, Orange Theory and CrossFit and, some of these other modalities that seem to be like relatively popular right now, where people just like want a quick workout and they want to get out. What does your synopsis look like in that original meeting with a new client?
Yeah, I mean, it varies obviously depending on the person and kind of what their goals are in their previous history. But one of the things that I always emphasize is that the human body, I'm a believer in God creating our bodies, and that if we use our bodies the way that they were created, the way they were intended to, that it naturally brings healing and restoration to our bodies. And so I try and explain that to them and say, hey, if we can kind of get you to use your muscles, use your body in a more efficient manner, then it's going to bring healing and restoration to those sites. And, I explain to them, say, hey, I've had an athlete where we had this scenario and that scenario, and just teaching them to move better helped, and it actually was the solution. And I can say all these things as much as I want, but again, it's really not until I get them on the floor and have them experience a few things like we talked about earlier. It's how you feel, how they feel. That's what they're going to remember. I can talk to them blue in the face. I can give them the greatest spiel of all time. If they don't feel it and they try it and it's like, I didn't really feel anything. It still feels lousy. My joints still hurt. They're probably not coming back. So that's why I make sure I have them do at least a handful of things where they can get that sense of feel right away.
And when you say a handful of things, you did mention some of the movement assessments that you look at. What are those movements one more time for people to kind of explore those?
Yeah. So personally for me, and again, it will vary from person to person, but almost always I'm going to look at their standing posture. And that should be for every person. I mean, if you can tell so much by looking at their posture. I can usually tell a decent amount when they walk in the door what's going on. You want to watch them walk. If they're an athlete, you probably want to watch them jog. They don't necessarily need to sprint. Watch them do some type of plank or push-up position to kind of examine their core. I like to have them do some type of squat, usually a bodyweight squat or a goblet squat. I'll have them do a hinge, a split squat, or a lunge. Usually have them do like a row or chest press. And again, if they've been having more upper body issues, I may have them throw in, okay, let's look at your shoulder press. Let's look at your lat pull down. Let's look at an incline press just to see a kind of deep dive into more of the specificity of what's going on in those muscles. Or if it's their legs or if there's something in their hips, I may say, hey, let's look at a single leg RDO. How do you hinge unilaterally? Do you favor one side? How do you hinge from like an eyes closed position? Do you start to shift more to one side? But it always comes back to, this is the big seven. I'm assessing their big seven. The big seven for me: squat, hinge, lunge. Those are the three lower body ones. And then we have horizontal push and pull, which would be like a chest press and row, and then vertical push and pull. And then after that, I'll look at some of the subtle elements of like foot and ankle stability, having them stand on one leg. I should have mentioned that. I have everyone do that. And then I'll have them do that. And almost always their second rep after they hold each side, I'll have them say, okay, go back and do it now, eyes closed. And always after about 3 to 5 seconds, they always lose their balance. And like, man, that's tough. And then you can start seeing their mind. It's like, okay, this is interesting. So yeah, those are pretty much the main ones. At rotational athletes, I may look at one rotational pattern, but even that's usually not overly necessary. So it's a pretty quick and dirty assessment. And I usually maybe 2 or 3 reps. That's about it.
I really love this, Joel. Like there's so much here, but maybe my next comment's going to be relatively pessimistic, but I can't help but throw out that when you look at our medical system, you sit in, some sort of entryway where there's like a front desk and they hand you a clipboard and, you check boxes based on how you feel and your past history. And, you hand that to the associate. They then give that to the doctor and they document all these things. You go in for a consult where you're typically sitting and the doctor just kind of looks at you and wants to make sure that you're alive. And you answer some very generic questions and they go, okay, you're having that issue. Let me write a script for you to go see a specialist. Or, oh, you're having that problem. Here's, some sort of script to go get some sort of pharmaceutical drug. Next. And, that's not fair because it's not always that way. And, maybe it's at the forefront of my brain. But what's so fascinating to me is like, you're listening. They're walking in the door. You're observing their movement upon them walking in. You're not hidden behind 7 different doors to get access to you. You have a whole onslaught of information on your website to help educate, motivate, and inspire people and give them tools in their toolbox wherever they are in their journey. Then you're listening, and you're not just listening to what they say, but you're listening to, are they chatting really fast and are they anxious? Are they chatting really slow and they're depressive? That matters with regards to your program design. Are they slumping in their posture? Are they guarding an injury? There's so much to unpack here. And then, after listening, you're kind of piecing together the puzzle based on their story that they shared with you. And you're now integrating movement patterns that, now this is more of their story that's not necessarily coming from their pie hole, but coming from the body that's kept the score for however many years. They've held or built up trauma. All this I describe as seeking to understand and information gathering, and then you implement a protocol. And the reason why I say all these things is because within our world, there's this narrative around price objection within the health and fitness industry. And I want to know why. Because everything that I just mentioned tells me that this client so much better than their doctor knows their client based on one session. Not to mention, you're probably going to see people on average 2 to 3 days a week, if not more. So now you're getting to know what their lifestyle is like, what their food is like, their sleep, their mindset, their habits, their day-to-day integration with the world, work-life balance, what that looks like, sleep. Maybe they share a Whoop or a Garmin score based on some of the data analytics of these metrics that are in the world now. There's a lot to unpack there. You have a book of knowledge, a whole file cabinet for every single person that you work with. Why is there so much price objection? Because you just did this incredible thing. And I'm sure you have people like, oh, how much does it cost? Oh, that's way out of my price range. Sorry, I'm going to go to Anytime Fitness down the street. That's $10. I can do a little key fob thing and I don't need to talk to anybody. I can throw on my headphones and it is what it is. What are your thoughts on this narrative? I'm unpacking a lot there. I'm not trying to be pessimistic, but it is something that I see relatively common within our world. And I think there's this seamless integration between preventative healthcare versus reactive healthcare. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, totally. I think we've become more about the reactive healthcare side of things and doctors and the physicians. And there's just the medical world kind of treating people like machines and robots instead of actual humans and trying to understand some of those deeper levels of what's going on in that human, not just physiological, but maybe the mental side of things and trying to tie in what's going on lifestyle factors and trying to see, hey, how are these things related, and treating the individual more than just, hey, come in, check the sheet, check the boxes, here's a prescription, done. And I think, like you said too, when we treat them like this, and maybe they have to pay a little bit of a premium, but guess what? It's going to actually resolve the issues. It's going to make them feel a lot better. So they're not going to have to keep going back to the doctors, and they're not going to have these kind of untreated issues that continue to linger, which over time, the amount of cost that builds up to is exponentially more than, hey, maybe come do 3-4 sessions with me. It's maybe going to cost a little bit more, but we're probably going to get to the root of the problem, get you feeling a lot better, and give you the tools in your toolbox and knowledge that you can go away, understanding how to continue to stay healthy. And if you ever want to come back for periodic checkups and tune-ins, you can. And so, people at first, it sometimes can be a little bit more money than they're willing to pay out, especially because what I do, it doesn't technically fall under physical therapy. So the insurance will not pay for it usually. So it's coming out of their pocket. So they have to see the value in it. That's why that first session for me is like, hey, I want to find out about this client. I want to assess them, but they need to see something before they walk out the door that makes them think this is going to work, because they're not going to come back unless they see that. So those last 15 minutes is big. You got to get some confidence in them. They got to see, hey, this is good. Even if it's not much, if they can be like, oh, wow, I felt that was different. Okay, I'm going to come back. I want to try it again. I feel like this could maybe be the solution. That's all it takes.
Yeah, I love that, Joel. And it also falls in alignment with, if you give somebody a fish, they'll eat that night. But if you teach them how to fish, they'll be able to, fend for themselves for the rest of their lives. And you're providing a ton of education. As we start to wrap things up today, man, I think there's some really common questions within, a traditional session. We briefly talked about the big 7, the squat, the hinge, the lunge for the lower body, a horizontal push and pull, and then a vertical push and pull. That kind of summarizes the brief 7. Maybe integrate some rotation or some foot stuff as well, because that is the anchor or the foundation. What does a traditional session look like for you? How many exercises do you implement? What is the time domain? And what do reps and sets traditionally look like? Do you pair things or individual set at a time? I'm sure there's case depends here, but to give people some nuggets to kind of take away for program design.
Yeah. So typically a session is going to be, I would say, anywhere between 6 to 10 exercises. Now, some of those exercises, we may only spend 2 minutes on it, maybe like a little single leg kind of activation, foot warm up type deal. And maybe 1 or 2 of those could be like a little core stabilization or like a postural exercise if I see that something posturally is not going on correctly. But almost always I'm going to try to include those big 7. Now, within the big 7, if we say we have an athlete who we know needs more foot and ankle strength, for example, those 3 lower body patterns, like the squat, the hinge, the split squat, we're going to make those more foot and ankle emphasized. We may do a single leg squat, a single leg hinge. We may do their split squat on a softer, unstable surface. So now we're actually kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. We're getting more foot and ankle stabilization. We're working on their motor control and their alignment while simultaneously still targeting the big movement patterns. Same thing with the upper body. We can take a chest press, do a single arm chest press with half their body off, and now their core is getting hammered with anti-rotation. They're also having to fire their glutes significantly, but they're still getting that intense horizontal chest pressing pattern in. So now we killed 3 birds with 1 stone. So there's ways to kind of consolidate the training so that you can integrate more components into those 6 or 7 exercises than just the 6 or 7 exercises. Now we may have included 14 or 15 different elements into those 6 or 7 exercises. So usually the reps will be, I usually like to say 3 to 6 reps. I know that for a lot of people listening, they're going to be like, wait, why is that so low? They're not power lifters. It's because the reps are done with the eccentric isometric protocol, which is much slower. So a typical rep is going to take around 3 times the duration than a traditional one. So a set of 3 to 6 is more like a set of, I would say 8 to 15 for most folks, because it lasts, 5 to 7 seconds per rep. So the time under tension is really all your muscles can tune into. And you will usually do 2 or 3 sets per exercise. Usually the first set, they're kind of grooving the neural patterns and those programs. And then the second set, we can see the strength start to build up because they're more efficient. And the third set, we may stimulate a little bit more muscle growth because we're actually hammering and fatiguing some of those motor units and muscle fibers a bit more. And then if they need warm-up sets leading up to that, especially if it's a strong athlete, we'll do that too.
Very cool, man. How do you kind of debunk I think I can do more, Coach Joel? Like, I want to do, a little bit more. I want to feel more of a pump. Like, what are your thoughts on that? If somebody, if that's the case, do they need to enhance the time under tension? Do they need to add more load? What are your thoughts there for, and I'm trying to think about traditional like CrossFit methodology where people are kind of rep chasing a little bit.
Yeah. My thing with that is I would say, even if you're a CrossFit athlete and you do have to rep chase because it's part of the competition, I would say take the last 10, 15 minutes of your session. And instead of doing more finishers and more kind of like high rep methods, I would say, hey, take a handful of exercises and do only 4 or 5 reps and make them as intense as possible by creating as much tension as possible. So instead of chasing reps or chasing numbers, chase tension.
That's really cool, man. And with these 6 to 10 exercises, what does the total time domain of a traditional session look like for you?
Typically about an hour. One of the things that I do is I do a lot of pairing and supersetting, and I'll have a bigger circuit. So for example, sometimes the circuit may be 2 or 3 exercises, sometimes it may be 3 or 5, but that allows several things. So we say, for example, we may do a squat pattern, maybe a core stabilization, maybe a row, and then maybe a chest press. And then we may cycle through that 3 times. And we may only give them 30 or 45 seconds of rest between, just to give them enough systemic recovery so they're not breathing too hard, so that they have enough energy and can create enough effort and intensity for the next set. But what that allows us to is they may have some systemic recovery and a little bit of systemic fatigue, but their local recovery, which is more important, especially from a technique and biomechanical standpoint, their local recovery is great because they don't come back to the same exercise for 5, 6, 7 minutes. So now they don't have too much fatigue in those muscles. So their ability to have high levels of sensory feedback and proprioception is still very high. Fatigue is kind of the enemy of motor programming and proprioception. So if there's too much fatigue, their ability to have that sense of feel goes out the window and their technique breaks down, and then it kind of defeats the whole purpose of what we're doing. So that way we can go, those circuits allow us to basically create a pretty fast-paced workout, get a high volume in, create a high level of work efficiency while minimizing local fatigue so they can still maximize body mechanics.
Very cool, man. For a CrossFit athlete looking to potentially implement some of the limited range of motion, some of the protocols that we discussed today around eccentric isometrics, really dialing in tension, would you say, as you kind of briefly alluded to before, the last 10 to 15 minutes of your session is where you can kind of implement that and integrate appropriate exercise selection based on what was accomplished in the traditional CrossFit session?
I would definitely say the last 10 to 15 minutes, but I would also say maybe 5 minutes before they start doing their large range of motion, just to wake up some muscle fibers and create better alignment. And they'll probably feel more locked in. They'll probably have less pain, less inflammation. They'll actually feel looser so that they can actually, if they need to go deeper and more range of motion, they'll be able to. It's almost like I've found the 90-degree centric isometric method is actually one of the best movement preparation tools there is, even if the athlete is going to be training with larger range of motion, whether it's Olympic weightlifter or CrossFit athlete or powerlifter.
Totally. Well, Joel, thank you so much, man. I want to get you to the rest of your day, but I appreciate you giving us a little bit of a peek behind the curtain and letting us learn a little bit of your tools within your toolbox and helping educate me and our amazing community. Any last minute thoughts for us?
No, I just got a new program coming out soon. It's actually an injury kind of rehabilitation program that I think is going to be pretty helpful for a lot of folks. I tried to cover as many types of injuries as possible. I mean, I think I include just about everything from toes to fingers, neck, everything.
Very cool, man. And you've got a whole slew of different programs out there, different books that you've kind of put together. Where can people find you and kind of learn more about, what you and your brother Joshua got going on?
Yeah, just at advancedhumanperformance.com. They can also find me on all the different social media platforms, Instagram, YouTube, all that.
There you go, guys. Dr. Joel Seedman, truly redefining fitness. If you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Joel today, please rate, review, subscribe, and share with your friends. And as always, stay on the hunt for who you've not yet become. Are you over 35 and in need of a solid training program? Are you looking to improve your athleticism and keep up with the younger athletes in your CrossFit gym? Then look no further than our Invictus Masters program. This program places year-round emphasis on mobility and stability exercises with movements that we have seen directly benefit our Masters athletes. Our program is led by Nicole DeHart and offers a training program designed specifically for Masters athletes who are looking to compete at a higher level in the sport of CrossFit. Some of our top Masters athletes in the world train with us, including CrossFit Games champion Kevin Kester, Matt Beals, and Pat Sprague. You can learn more about their stories and the Invictus Masters program by checking out their episodes right here on the Invictus Mindset Podcast. If you'd like more information about the current training cycle or to join the Invictus Masters program, please email Nicole at invictusathlete.com. That's NICHOLE at invictusathlete.com. Breathing, movement, circulation, digestion. What do all these body functions have in common? Our muscles. There are over 600 muscles in the human body that are responsible for supporting our daily activities. That's why your muscle health is incredibly important. On this podcast, I always discuss seeking our peak expression and striving to maximize our human potential. And so I try to share with you the top products that I find on the market. My H&B is a clinically proven ingredient that has been shown to help build and maintain lean muscle mass, increase strength, improve recovery, and enhance body composition. Learn more about your muscle health at myhmb.com/Invictus. Once again, that's myhmb.com/Invictus. Enhance your muscle health and enhance your life.